Today we're talking about a very long overdue topic, and that is healing and anti-heal in Smite. The reason I'm talking about this now is because I very recently made a long post about a specific aspect of it and about the viability of certain anti-heal items, so I figured I might as well get this over and done with now that I already wrote so much about it. We're going to talk about how healing even works in Smite, then what gods have any sort of anti-heal in their kit, then what positive items you have in regards to healing that give you some sort of benefit for healing, and then anti-heal items. And then we're also going to talk about why certain anti-heal items aren't that great. So let's begin with how healing and anti-healing works. In this context, a shout out to Flairboot, who figured all of this out a long time ago and wrote it down in the Word of Thoth. So if you want to know more on Smite mechanics in general, check that out. Healing and anti-heal is relatively simple. You have your percentage increases and percentage decreases, for the most part at least. And those are additive. So if you, for example, have a healing of 100% at the start, your normal healing, and then you get a 20% increase, then it's 120%. And if you get a 20% increase after that, it's not 120% with a multiplier of 20%, it's just 140. And in the same way, if you have any anti-heal, it's simply subtracted. So if you normally have 100 healing and a 20% healing increase, you then have 120 healing, but then you have a 40% healing reduction, then it'll go down to 80 healing. Very simple. It's really just a plus and minus between healing and anti-heal. There's one exception to the rule, which is Hell, who will have a 20% healing increase in her light stance that is applied before everything else. So this gets factored in differently. This basically creates a new 100% value, including the amplification from Hell's passive, and is therefore differently affected by anti-heal. Healing comes in different shapes in Smite, and not every single heal is a team heal, like for example Hell's is. If you look at Tyr, he has a self-heal in his 2 that only heals him, or if you look at Freya, her passive gives her a heal per basic attack. Not everything is a heal, sometimes you have lifesteal effects, and those typically differ in how they are calculated. Heals usually work with a flat value or a percentage value of your health, whereas lifesteal works with the damage that you deal. So if you deal more damage, then you will lifesteal more, but a healing effect would not be increased through that. That is, unless it were a healing effect that specifies that the healing scales off your damage. We're gonna focus on healing here, but just to make this clear once again, even though lifesteal and healing are affected by some of the same things, which we get into, that doesn't mean that lifesteal counts as healing. For example, lifesteal will not proc Shield of Regrowth, whereas any sort of self-healing will. Now we're not gonna talk about every single god in the game that has healing, that would just be a little bit overkill. You should be able to tell if a god is healing when you use them, so I'll let you figure that part out. But what is often not as obvious is anti-heal. So this is a part I want to talk about. And in this context, I'd like to quickly shout out Psyduck, don't give a quack. That is not actually his name, but you can figure out what the last part is. Because this guy went on Reddit and made a collection of all the anti-heal gods that we have in Smite with their anti-heal abilities. This was quite a while ago now, so I had to make some small updates, but it was much easier to collect everything this way. The first god here is Cuchulainn, who in his 1 has a 50% healing reduction for 4 seconds. This is part of the reason why he was able to be so dominant in solo lane as well, as he really bullies out sustain gods with that. The next one is chang'e. This one is actually a little bit more interesting. She also gets 50% healing reduction for 4 seconds. However, in her case, it's tied to her own healing. So you don't always want to use that in every situation, as sometimes you're full health and you might need your heal soon, and therefore can't reduce the enemy's healing, depending. Cerberus has a very easy way of reducing the enemy's healing, because through his passive, every target in a 40 unit radius has their healing reduced by 20%. Additionally, Cerberus also gets 40% of the healing, but that's irrelevant for the healing reduction. What you have to keep in mind is that you have to stay close enough to the enemy. 40 units is not that far. Barco's healing used to be tied to his tipsiness level and no longer is now, making it a little bit more effective. It is on his burp, and it's also a 50% healing reduction for 4 seconds. Medusa's anti-heal is probably the riskiest one in the game, and a lot of people don't know about it. Her 3 has 50% anti-heal for 3 seconds, so 1 second shorter than most others. And also, you have to use your only escape and go in and hit the enemy with it. So this is something that is only really useful for 1v1 situations where you know that no one else will be around. Often I find myself just using it to kill someone off and not to reduce their healing, but there are niche situations where it can be interesting. The next 3 gods in the alphabetical order all do the same thing. And that is, starting with Odin, all healing is completely eliminated for 5 seconds in the cage. And by all healing, I mean all healing. During his ultimate, you cannot heal at all. The reduced value is actually minus 1000% healing. This is so that you can't counteract this with items like Rod of Asclepius, and it is intended that way. The same thing is true for Osiris. In his case, it's also the ultimate that will reduce the enemy's healing entirely for 6 seconds. For Serket, the same is also true, and is also with her ultimate for a single target, removing any healing for 5 seconds. And last but not least, we have Sobek. His 3 will reduce your healing by 50% for 4 seconds, which is part of the reason why he is such a strong solo laner in certain matchups. That's it for the gods, now the items. First, the items that have a positive interaction of some sort with healing. Rod of Healing, which increases your healing by 5%, or by 10% if you've dealt or taken damage in the last 5 seconds, or if you are in combat. This is obviously just the first stage to Rod of Asclepius, and with Rod of Asclepius you have a 10% healing increase or 25% under the same combat conditions. Lotus Crown doesn't directly influence your healing, but gives you 20 protections of each kind if you've been healed, and it lasts for 5 seconds. So quite often, especially when facing Antiheal, this can be the better option. It just gives you more survivability in other ways, which in a combat situation pretty much equals or is better than being healed unless you're already very low before you get healed. And then there's also Shield of Regrowth, which will increase your movement speed by 40% for 4 seconds after being healed. This is something that's more frequently picked up by self-healing characters. And that brings us to the Antiheal items, which, by the way, affect lifesteal as well. The first one here is Pestilence. Pestilence is the one for tanks, coming with some health and magical defense, and it has a 25% healing reduction. And different from the other items, it doesn't have any effect that has a duration, but rather it's in 55 units around the character that has it. So a little bit more than Cerberus passive here. If you're a solo laner or sometimes even a support that needs to have some anti-heal, this is your item. The next 2 are kind of very much in the same area, and that is Brawler's Beatstick and Divine Ruin. Both come with 40% healing reduction, and both last for 8 seconds. In order to apply either of them, you have to hit an enemy with an ability. As such, these are primarily used by ability-based gods, though at least Divine Ruin is sometimes seen on basic attack focused mages as well, if the anti-heal is required, and Brawlers can sometimes be fit into, for example, Hunter builds too. Then there is the outlier, which is Toxic Blade. The Toxic Blade doesn't really fit in anywhere, to be honest. It gives you 20% reduced healing per basic attack with 2 stacks, lasting for 8 seconds. So effectively that means that you can get up to 40% reduced healing for 8 seconds. The difference being that this is obviously refreshed as long as you keep spamming basic attacks, but then again, that's also kind of true for abilities. The problem with Toxic Blade compared to the others is that it doesn't really fully have a niche. It is obviously an item that is more focused on attack speed, with the basic attack effect and with it having 30% attack speed, as well as 15 penetration, 10 movement speed, and 100 health. But you can see from this mix of stats that it's not really that effective for an attack speed carry, for example, so it's rarely picked up by most gods. I think if the health was transitioned into something more aggressive, this item would have a lot more value. And last but not least, we have Cursed Ankh. Cursed Ankh reduces the healing of enemy gods within 55 units by 50% for 10 seconds when used. The upgraded version has a little bit of an additional punishment, being enemies that are healed while affected by this curse take 20% more damage from all sources for the duration of the curse. And Cursed Ankh is the one that I want to talk a little bit more about. Cursed Ankh has a problem. It's rarely ever being built, even in situations where you would think it would be a very good choice. And that is for multiple reasons. First of all, the tier 1 version of this item is actually pretty bad. Cursed Ankh's purpose can easily be fulfilled by other items to almost the same degree. Brawlers and Divine both have 40% anti-heal, Cursed Ankh just has 50%. It's a minor increase of 10% or of 20% overall, depending on how we want to look at it. Likewise, with both of those having 8 seconds duration, the 10 seconds of Cursed Ankh aren't much longer. And you could also just opt into Pestilence and get half of that anti-heal, but constantly and not only once ever so often when you can activate your relic. Most other relics have a very beneficial secondary effect on their first rank already, or just have very strong stats overall. Cursed Ankh really just has that anti-healing, even though once upon a time in the past when we had actives, it still had a slow as well. And let's look at Horrific Emblem's tier 1 in comparison. It has a slow, which is also something that other items offer, but the slow has 4 times the duration of that of Frostbound, with a stronger primary and secondary effect being the attack speed slow and the movement speed slow, as well as 2.5 times the duration of Gem of Isolation, with a stronger effect, a way stronger effect, and a secondary effect that Gem of Isolation doesn't even have. So those ones are just not comparable. You don't get the same out of Frostbound or Isolation as you get out of Horrific. Additionally, other team relics always have a degree of benefit, be it Meditation, be it Shell, be it Sprint, or be it a Curse, because they all give you something no matter who you're up against, whereas Cursed Ankh as the only one only does something as long as the enemy heals somehow. So the other items will always have an effect against the entire matchup, whereas Cursed Ankh may only work against 1 or 2 characters, and it's often not worth picking that up, especially not early. If you pick it up as a first item, you're basically giving up lane in duo lane at least. It becomes more effective when you upgrade it, as it gives you the additional damage taken for enemies, 20% extra when they heal. But is that really that good? And you know, I wouldn't be asking if it was actually that good. It would be good if it wasn't conditional. It is something that only happens when the enemy heals, so if the enemy is smart enough, they will just not heal during that time to not take extra damage. Meanwhile, Horrific Emblem does the reverse. The enemy damage dealt is reduced by 20%. So if you're the smart person, you already started with Horrific in lane against someone with Cursed Ankh, what do you do once you get to late game team fights? You pop your Horrific when they pop their Cursed Ankh, and the damage increase is completely negated by the damage reduction that the enemy gets. The only difference here is that Horrific Emblem procs 100% of the time. The enemy doesn't have to attack first or anything like that. It is automatically activated, whereas Cursed Ankh only procs when you are healing. Additionally, Horrific Emblem's other effects are also a lot more impactful because they effectively reduce the enemy's damage output anyways, A, through slowing them, make it also easier to chase them down, but also B, through reducing their attack speed, meaning that they may have to heal less in the end anyways. So Cursed Ankh definitely has the worst tier 1 version, but then the tier 2 version is also weaker than the tier 2 version of Horrific Emblem, and that just means that it's overall a very bad pickup. And similar things are true in comparison to other relics that is not as direct. Now this may mean that other relics are just too strong, but it definitely makes Cursed Ankh not worth it most of the time over any other anti-heal items, unless the enemy team has excessive amount of tick healing like Terra plus Sylvanas or something. And that should at least to some degree explain Cursed Ankh's lack of popularity. One last thing that's worth mentioning regarding Antiheal, Aquatic doesn't directly have Antiheal in his kit, but has massive counter tools against healers with his 3 as well. And that's it for today. I hope this was interesting and insightful. If you're new to the channel, feel free to smash that subscribe button. And other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.